O God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight. You are strength and our Redeemer. Amen. On this Sunday, I say to you, Namaste. Namaste is a word that defies for us any easy translation. It is a Sanskrit word meaning to bow. It indicates a deep respect and honoring of another person. Namaste itself is a very generous word because when you bow to another person, you want the best for them. And you bow from your own highest intentions. Now, most languages and traditions have a word such as namaste, that is a generous and inclusive word. Hawaiians have aloha, the Navajo have hozo, the Jewish tradition has shalom, and Christianity has grace. All of these words transcend any one tradition or any one definition. They all indicate a state of equilibrium of the mind, of the body, and spirit in balance. It is the storms and the changes of life that can't even shake this kind of balance. Not even a leaf stirs on a well-rooted tree that is balanced. It is a pond without the slightest ripple. It is the silence of a star-filled sky. Balance for our souls. Balance is often most recognizable, though, I find, when it's absent, don't you? And I get this strong sense that our world, especially after this past Friday, is completely out of balance right now. So maybe this short story will resonate. The story goes that apparently God was missing for 6 days. And eventually Michael, the archangel, found him, resting on the 7th day. He inquired of God, "Where have you been?" God sighed a sigh of deep satisfaction and proudly pointed downwards through the clouds and said, "Look, Michael, look what I've made." Archangel Michael looked very puzzled and said, "What is it?" "It's a planet," replied God, "and I've put life on it. I'm going to call it Earth, and it's going to be a place of incredible balance." "Balance?" inquired Michael, still confused. God explained, pointing to the different parts of the earth. "For example, the West will be a place of great opportunity and wealth, while the East will be a place of inner wealth and very rich culture. And over there I've placed a continent of white people, and over there is a continent of black people. Balance in all things." And God continued pointing out the different countries. "This one over here will be extremely hot and dry, while this one over here will be very cold and covered in ice." The archangel, now impressed by God's work, then pointed to a land area and said, "What's that one?" "Ah," said God, "that's Washington State, the most glorious place on earth. There are beautiful mountains and rivers and streams and lakes and forests and hills and plains and coulees. The people from Washington State are going to be good-looking, modest, intelligent, and humorous. And they are going to be found traveling all over the world. They will be extremely sociable, hard-working, high-achieving, and they will be known throughout the world as diplomats and bearers of peace." Michael gasped in wonder and admiration, but then proclaimed, "What will balance this Washington state?" God smiled. "Ah, there's another Washington. And wait until you see the idiots I put there." Sadly, if it wasn't so frightening, it would be hilarious. Unfortunately, it's just frightening. Our world is out of balance in every way. We multiply our possessions but lack the inner character to use them with integrity. Our homes are bigger and full of more gadgets, but the relationships inside them are broken. We have impressive tall buildings but short tempers. We have vast resources but narrow viewpoints. We have more and more convenience but less time to enjoy it. We have more medicine but less wellness, more knowledge but less judgment. We've even learned how to add years to our life, but we haven't learned how to use those years with more life. We've conquered outer space, but our inner space is like a black hole. We've conquered and found the world is out of balance. And it doesn't have to be this way. In fact, we can have both if only we find the balance of the inner and the outer worlds. It didn't have to be this way. I suggest to you, if the appetite for financial growth over the last 10 years has been balanced by a contented spirit and a little foresight, perhaps there wouldn't be as many economic crises going on around our world. The very notion that credit indicates an imbalance, the desire for goods outpaces the ability to afford those goods. Now, credit may be necessary in our world, but if it's not balanced with sustainable foresight, it will continue, I hunch, to destroy our lives. You know, I find it sad that we call it an economic crisis sometimes in our world when times hit hard on Wall Street and the middle class, but we don't take the time to call rampant poverty an economic crisis. It's incredible that we could have people who could find at one time $700 billion to reignite the flow of credit in its day. But at that time, we could not find the money to save thousands of children who die every day from preventable diseases. I ask you, what are our priorities? What is our balance in life? It didn't have to be this way, even with our environment. If only we had balanced our ability to harness natural resources with a foresight for sustainability and a respect for Mother Earth's own regenerative processes, we wouldn't be in the mess that we find ourselves in now. Some seasons do yield an abundant harvest, and others are lean, and that's life. I say to you, give thanks either way for nature's seasons, but somehow you and I have to become to a place that we believe we have a right to an abundant harvest, it seems, every day of every year. And we expect what we want when we want it in every aspect of our lives. Politics doesn't even have to be this way in our lives. When a political campaign spends so much energy desperately creating dirt on an opposing candidate that they can incite some of the type of murderous hatred we have seen in rallies around our world, then it's a clear sign that the campaign has lost balance. Of course, each political campaign is right to question the character of their opponent, but when some people are calling out, "Kill him or her," at a political rally, then balance has been lost. What are the priorities? Where is the balance? You see, balance isn't just for Washington or perhaps even for Ottawa. It's a challenge for every single one of us, and no doubt you and I have our own unique challenges when it comes to balance. Personally, I tend to be an all or nothing person. So my challenge is to accept both and. Maybe for you it's the balance between work and play. Maybe it's the balance between justice and forgiveness. Maybe it's the balance between self-worth and humility. Maybe it's the balance for your own needs with the needs of others. Maybe it's the balance between changing what you can change and accepting what you cannot. Maybe it's the balance between striving and just being. And maybe it's the balance between discernment and acceptance. Balance has been an emphasis in all religions, particularly Buddhism and Christianity. Balance is a major theme in Buddhism, 589 years before the Christ. It was when the Buddha coined the phrase, the middle path, in an address to his monks. He said this, "Monks, these two extremes ought not to be cultivated by the recluse." What two? Sensual indulgence, which is low, vulgar, worldly, ignoble, and conducive to harm, and self-mortification, which is painful, ignoble as well. The middle path, monks, avoiding the extremes, gives visions and knowledge that leads to a sense of calm, realization, and enlightenment, and nirvana. And what, monks, is that middle path? It is this noble eightfold path, namely, right understanding, right thought, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. And over the last number of years, it's the Dalai Lama himself who's been a focal proponent of the middle path in relationships between China and Tibet. He proposes neither dependence on China nor complete independence from China, but rather a degree of cultural autonomy. He advocates a non-violent protest against Chinese oppression, rather than an extreme form of violent insurrection. Christianity has a more nuanced view of balance, I hunch. On first reading, Jesus proposed anything but balance. He was radical in every way in his teaching. He said, "If you are not for me, you are against me. Give up everything and follow me. And if you are lukewarm, I will spit you out." He appeared to be an advocate for extreme radicalism. In fact, the word balance occurs very rarely anywhere in the Bible. It appears as the Hebrew word mosen and the Greek word zugos. Both words refer to the poles carried across our shoulders that balance those two containers. Each container needed to be similar weight and in right position in order to be balanced. The Hebrew word mosen itself is quite fascinating because it's the same root word as ear. Thousands of years before science revealed that the inner ear, you see, is the control center for human balance. The Hebrews in their day used the same word for ear and for balance. Is this a coincidence or some sort of inherent wisdom? Mosin also shares its root with the Hebrew word for a hawk, gliding in perfect balance on nature's currents. The ear was so important, you see, in Hebrew culture. Unlike the Greek world of sights and fine physical form, Hebrew culture emphasized sound over sight as the domain of God's revelation. God was unknowable and invisible, but God's word was heard from Sinai. And the tradition was passed on orally, and only after some time was the law cast in stone, so to speak. In Matthew's gospel that we heard this morning, Jesus offered balance, usually translated as yoke, to those who felt heavy with all of life's demands. What did he mean? How do you reconcile Jesus' radical and extreme teaching with any notion of balance? Maybe it's something like this: firmness without being cold, commitment without being dogmatic, love without being codependent, patience without being passive, loyalty without being blind, faith without being presumptuous, and hope without being naive. How do you retain balance in your religious views? Well, consider this story. Once the devil was walking along with one of his cohorts. They saw a man ahead of them pick up something very shiny. "What did he find?" asked the cohort. "A piece of the truth," the devil replied. "Doesn't it bother you he found a piece of the truth?" asked the cohort. "No," said the devil. "I will see to it that he makes a religion out of it that will suit my purposes just perfectly." Religions lose their balance when they confuse a story with literal truth. Religions go wrong when they confuse certain knowledge of God with an experience of mystery that they call God. Religions are deluded when they teach any form of afterlife as the absolute truth. Take heed. All of your beliefs are important, but partial truths. They must be partial, you see. That is, unless you know and have experienced everything in life. And I've not met a human being yet who has experienced everything. I say to you, balance your partial truths with a commitment to curiosity and new understandings. How does balance work? Well, quite simply. There are blobs of jelly in each ear. And when you move your head, these blobs of jelly move, and this triggers tiny hairs to bend. And when they bend, they give off electricity which runs through your nervous system into your brain. That's why if you spin around really fast, you lose your balance. So think wobbling jelly. You stay balanced by keeping your center of gravity directly above your base. The broader your base, the easier it is to stay balanced. If you stand with your feet close together or even on one leg, it's harder to balance. So what are the spiritual lessons from the science of this word? I'll share them with you. Lesson 1. Know your base. When all else is changing and swinging from one extreme to another, what is constant? When your ideas about how you are and your stories about your life are in constant flux, what is unchanging? The one who witnesses the changes. The one who sees the ever-changing self-image for what it is and doesn't get caught up in their own sense of identity. That is a key to balance. Lesson 2. See the benefit in flailing. Sometimes when you see yourself swinging like a pendulum from one extreme to another, from one belief to another, from one story to another, that's just half the battle. Just notice it and don't get too attached to it. Because you aren't likely to stay there forever, so don't give yourself a hard time for being there. It's the flailing, you see, that helps you to restore your balance by coming back to your center of gravity. Life doesn't have to be lived with any either-or mentality. In fact, we can have both and. Some problems, you see, are not meant to be solved, just managed. Imagine life as a game in which you are juggling a number of balls in the air. Things like work, family, health, friends, even your own spirit. And you're keeping all of those things up in the air. You will soon realize that work is a rubber ball. It will bounce back eventually. But the other balls, family, health, friends, and your own spirit are made of glass. If you drop one of these, they will be damaged and even shattered. And they will never be the same. So on the second Sunday of Lent, why don't we, even as congregations, strive for balance in our lives? Why don't you, as an individual, strive for balance in your own life and know what is most important and hold the core of your life in balance as if you are juggling glass? Maybe that the soul work for you, maybe that the soul work for me.